this recap, we're going to cover episode 6 and 7, and pretty much it just goes into the evolution of Faraday, the changes that Josiah is going through, and also exploring a bit into who Spencer is beyond the CIA evil guy that he portrays himself as. So, let's begin with Spencer to get that out the way. From what we learned between episode 6, but especially in episode 7, Spencer is the son of a Russian immigrant who was a terrorist. Drew found him, potentially raised him since he was possibly in the sigil digits when it came to his age. And it seems either to kind of go against who his mom was known as or else to prove himself, he always had this drive to do the most. Unfortunately though, as we've seen, doing the most has bitten him in the ass. In the case of the most recent episode, he decided to throw Drew under the bus in order for him to secure authority over the Faraday investigation / the Newton investigation. Something that isn't necessarily going entirely well. Yes, there is a possibility that Spencer found one of Newton's hideouts, possibly a past one, but he decides to go on his own authority to have it explored by soldiers, and those soldiers die horrible deaths. They breathe in some kind of spores that make their head explode, and then all those explosions mixing with high levels of oxygen lead to the kind of explosion that wipes out the existence of the soldiers. But thanks to him throwing Drew under the bus, he's able to get away with it and assert further authority over the whole Faraday-Newton situation. Which is something that Edie and both Hatch don't want, so they try to get this man named Pressman Fawn on board because he's a big oil magnate, he has a CIA in his back pocket, and the hope is with his influence, they can get people like Spencer to back down because, from what it's explained, Pressman Fawn or Fawn Pressman, I forget which way his name goes, he has people in the Senate in his pockets, specifically senators who work on the committees which control the CIA's budget. So, with that in mind, it's a hope that, at least on Edie's side, that with getting them on his side, getting him to invest in Origin, if not take over, that would mean the Spencer types and all that will back down. Hatch, though, is kind of thinking, why are we getting in bed with these people? They're dinosaurs. They're pure evil. We have this clean energy source, and yet you're going to hand it over to the people who have been ruining the planet for years. And who might know? Who knows? They may decide they don't want to be part of this. They want to hold the patents and technology, but keep things going as usual because that's a steady income flow that they know. But by the end of episode 7, Edie has made the deal, and Hatch can't really say much since he still only has a minority stake in the company. Which brings us to Faraday. Faraday is going through changes, as we've seen in episode 6. Faraday is starting to really become an adept, and with that, he's trying to explore what it means to be human more and more each day. This is something especially seen when it comes to episode 6, where we see a bit of a mix of the weird Faraday with this new Faraday in terms of having eccentric moments when he's narrating all the things that Justin's family does. Whether it's their rituals when it comes to breakfast, dancing, whatever, he's just taking note and showing that a lot of this is becoming normalized for him. But in the process of that, he still has his challenges. There's a challenge of Hatch not necessarily communicating much with Faraday and Justin about what's going on that end in terms of the business aspect. And that leads to Faraday and Justin deciding, especially after Faraday speaks with Newton, that being behind the scenes is not going to work anymore. Faraday needs to push himself to the forefront, and with that, he contacts, alongside Justin, Hatch's contact named Penny, who works at the Washington Post. They talk, and it's hoped that she'll get the ball rolling in terms of upping Faraday's profile so that he can become indispensable and the CIA can't just wipe him off the face of the earth, put him into a cell somewhere without people asking questions, like they did with Newton. With that said, in terms of how Justin, Molly, and Josiah are doing, Josiah essentially is becoming a drone day by day, and it's getting very hard for Justin and Molly to deal with that. He finds little to no purpose in hanging out with Molly. He's starting to become very indifferent unless it's something that's purposeful, like working on Faraday's fusion quantum project. And Justin's having a hard time with that. After all, Dad is her father. He's this loving man who she got these beautiful weeks or months with before he started to become a drone. So it's a lot of changes that are kind of messing with her head. And then in terms of what Justin's dealing with as an individual, she's mostly just trying to focus on the work and navigate the politics. Lucy, for example, is trying to do something different than what Spencer's doing and kind of contact Justin, try to make her kind of her inside person, but Justin doesn't trust Lucy, as she shouldn't, because Lucy, at the end of the day, it's not clear whose side she's on. Is she on her side, Spencer's, Justin, humanity's? It's hard to tell. All we know for sure is that if she's someone who's associated with Spencer, more than likely she's trying to get a leg up, and as Spencer's ship starts to sink because he wants to do all these things unauthorized, Lucy can possibly get the job done with authorization and or at least throw Spencer under the bus the same way Spencer threw Drew under the bus. It's a lot. But long story short, Justin is just trying to figure out how to get the work done, not fall into the same pitfalls she did when she tried before. And when it comes to Molly, she's just trying to figure out a way to give her stability and lessen the trauma that pretty much is guaranteed at this point. So in terms of highlights, it's definitely going to be the character development of Spencer, Faraday, and also when it comes to Lisa. Lisa, since the beginning, Lisa seemed like the type who may or may not be on Spencer's side because she seems to be just as capable of doing wrong as he is, but I think that she still has her wits about her, so she's not going to go so far to the point that she'll lose her job. Spencer, he's past the point of no return, and it seems like between maybe trying to redeem his name after what his mother did or who knows what, he's a lost cause. But it's good to know that part of the reason he is this way is because his mom was a terrorist. He got abandoned at a young age, and then Drew came swooping in and I guess groomed him to be a CIA agent, which makes the whole betrayal of her so much bigger than it was before. And it kind of deepens how much of a villain he's going to be when it comes to the show. Then, switching over to Faraday, I appreciate what was done in episode 6 because it found a way to harness that weird character that we got early on and made a good bridge to the person he's ultimately going to be in terms of someone who has a Steve Jobs kind of appeal. Someone who gets put on a pedestal, and if he got snatched off, it would be a detrimental thing to not only Origin, but also to the CIA in terms of trying to exert its control. And I would even add in that when it comes to Faraday and these changes, especially when you put Josiah into the mix, it's an interesting thing to see how much of this is DNA based in terms of like Josiah starting to drain himself of emotion, yet having these more strong memories, versus what we see what Faraday's going through as he becomes an adept, and wondering how much of an adept is based off of DNA and how much being an adept is based off of just nurture, for lack of a better way, because that's kind of how I'm seeing it right now. It's a nature versus nurture thing. When it comes to adepts, it's a nurture thing, and when it comes to drones, maybe it's a nature thing. Though when Thomas Newton and Faraday interact, you do get the sense that when it comes to getting assigned as an adept or a drone, there's more to it than, maybe genetics or who you're born into, and it could be something that's a bit more nefarious, because the way that Thomas Newton makes it seems, Faraday should not have been a drone. He should have been an adept. So there's a question of why did he get assigned to that? And I don't know, there's still a lot of questions that are left unanswered. Like, for example, Thomas Newton potentially lying to Faraday, and he wants to get Amphians to Earth rather than get him and Thomas, or Faraday and Thomas, whatever, get them back to Amphia. But again, what we're really focusing on right now is just the development of these characters and how it's drawing you in more, and really showing that there are layers to these characters beyond what we originally saw. And even when it came to the episode 1, Faraday seemed very bland. That's because he was fitting into a mold that he discovered through watching Humanity and pretty much imitating what he needs to be in order to secure not only some sense of autonomy over his work, but also safety from being so public. In terms of on the fence topics, I think right now it's just Edie and her storyline because while Spencer, Lucy, Faraday, and Josiah are having character development, Edie's still very much stuck in who she is. Yes, there is some type of reconciliation with Hatch in episode 7, but whether or not that's manipulation or not, it's hard to say. Also, when it comes to Edie and Spencer and that little back and forth they have in episode 7, it was interesting for a hot minute, but because Spencer is a bit more psychopathic than Edie can ever be, I don't see her as a formidable opponent to him. I see her as someone who has a little bit too much ego and doesn't realize that she's biting off more than she can chew. Add in the fact that we haven't really gone into her past much besides, her dad causing her to have an eating disorder, her having the son she kind of avoids at all costs. It's like there's so much there that we need to see more of for all these other actions to really be, I don't want to say impactful, but definitely matter more, but it's avoiding the personal development and instead focusing on the story development. And for me, without getting interested in her as a character, her story about wanting to get protection against the CIA and all that is just not that interesting. I mean, it's necessary, but it's not that interesting. The second on the fence topic is just this idea of Faraday falling in love with Justin. And purely the main issue we have with that is that Faraday has been talking about his wife and kids for at least half this season. So for him to just forget all that and just focus on Justin and kind of fall in love with her, it just seems wrong. But at the same time, I'm one of those people who feel very much against, quick transitions between relationships or having it where, like you see in a lot of holiday movies, where it's this vibe that, because the girlfriend, the wife, husband, boyfriend, whatever is so bad, this person kind of cheating light because they kissed somebody else or fell in love with somebody else is supposed to be justified because look at their partner. Their partner is so horrible, they were going to break up anyway. Makes me uncomfortable. Don't like it. And when it comes to Justin and Faraday, I feel like Faraday and Justin just aren't really ready for a relationship. Faraday is still learning how to be human. And when it comes to Justin, I don't think she fully processed all that happened with Molly's dad. She instead buried it deep by going through work, worrying about her father, worrying about her daughter, and I don't think she still is really trying to make time to process what happened to him, especially how traumatic that was. I mean, she hasn't even told Molly what happened at this point, so why start something new when you've barely gotten past what's old? So overall, when it comes to these two episodes, I feel like the man who felt up is definitely going in a positive direction. It still has some kinks to work out, like when it comes to Edie, and maybe even Hatch down the road, but I do think that assuming it sticks to being a one-season show, by episode 10, 12, whichever one it goes up to, we'll have something that's of quality. It'll be like most shows where it kind of feels like it went on longer than it should have, and they could have cut out some of the fat, but overall, it'll be something decent to watch. It may be something that you may want to recommend to people, especially if they have a Showtime subscription.